The dirt beneath Sarah Catherine's boots had turned to mud from the morning rain when she overheard Mrs. Patterson's voice carrying across the general store in Coloma, California, sharp as a whip crack. 30 years old and never been touched by a man, can you imagine? The words hit Sarah like a bucket of ice water, freezing her in place between the flour sacks and the canned goods, her basket hanging forgotten from her arm. It was September of 1875, and Sarah had lived her entire life in this gold rush town that had seen better days, watching it transform from a booming settlement to a quiet community where everyone knew everyone else's business. She pressed herself against the wooden shelving, her heart hammering against her ribs as Mrs. Patterson continued her gossip with Mrs. Holloway, their voices dripping with a mixture of pity and scandalous delight. Her father kept her locked up tighter than a bank vault when he was alive, Mrs. Holloway responded, her tone equally condemning. And now look at her, 30 years old, running that farm all alone. It is not natural for a woman. Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation. She knew what they thought of her, what the whole town thought. She was the peculiar Catherine girl who had never married, never courted, never done anything except work her father's land and keep to herself. Her father, Thomas Catherine, had been a stern man who believed the world was full of unworthy suitors, and he had made it his life's mission to ensure Sarah remained pure and untouched until the right man came along. Then he had died 2 years ago, leaving her alone on a struggling farm with nothing but his impossible standards and her untouched reputation. She waited until the women moved to another part of the store before making her purchases quickly, avoiding eye contact with Mr. Henderson behind the counter. The weight of judgment followed her out into the afternoon sun, and she climbed onto her wagon with as much dignity as she could muster, snapping the reins harder than necessary. The ride back to her property took her along the winding mountain road, past the American River where 49ers had once panned for gold with desperate hope in their eyes. Those days were long gone, but the mountains remained, towering and eternal, covered in pine and oak. Sarah's farm sat in a small valley, 20 acres of land that demanded constant attention. She had cattle to tend, chickens to feed, a vegetable garden to maintain, and repairs that never seemed to end. As she rounded the bend near her property, she noticed something that made her pull back on the reins. Smoke rose from somewhere near her barn, thin and gray against the clear sky. Her pulse quickened. She had not lit any fires that morning, and she lived alone. Strangers in these parts could mean trouble, drifters, or worse. Sarah reached beneath the wagon seat and pulled out her father's old rifle, checking that it was loaded. Her hands remained steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Living alone had taught her to be cautious. She guided the horses forward slowly, scanning the area for movement. The source of the smoke became clear as she approached. A man sat near her barn, tending a small campfire, his back to her. A massive horse, easily 17 hands high, stood tethered nearby, its coat dark as midnight. The man himself was enormous, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, his hair dark and hanging past his collar. He wore buckskin and rough wool, the clothing of someone who lived in the wilderness rather than civilization. "That is far enough," Sarah called out, raising the rifle to her shoulder. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "State your business or move along." The man turned slowly, rising to his feet with an easy grace that belied his size. Sarah found herself looking up at a face that was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, with eyes the color of amber that studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his arms, bare to the elbow, showed muscles that spoke of a life spent in hard labor and survival. He had to be in his early 30s, and there was something wild about him, something untamed that reminded her of the mountains themselves. "Name is Isaac Jamison," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "Did not mean to trespass. I was tracking a wounded bear, lost the trail near your property. Needed to rest my horse and check my supplies before heading back up the mountain." Sarah kept the rifle steady, though her arms were beginning to ache. "You are a hunter?" "Trapper, mostly. Live up in the high country." He gestured toward the peaks visible in the distance. "Been coming down to Coloma for supplies twice a year for the past 8 years. Never seen you in town before." "I keep to myself," Sarah said curtly. She studied him carefully, looking for signs of deception or danger. Mountain men had a reputation, and not all of it was good. But there was something about the way he stood, calm and patient, his hands away from the knife at his belt, that made her think he was telling the truth. "Why camp on my property instead of going into town? Town is still 5 miles off. My horse threw a shoe, was checking his hoof when I smelled your land, figured I was close to civilization." He nodded toward the big black horse. "Found the problem, fixed it, was just having some coffee before moving on." Sarah lowered the rifle slightly. "You fixed your horse's shoe yourself?" "Man lives alone in the mountains. He learns to do everything himself." Isaac's amber eyes never left her face, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny. "You live here alone?" "That is none of your concern," Sarah replied, though the answer was obvious. There were no other horses, no signs of anyone else on the property. She saw his gaze travel over the farm, taking in the sagging fence posts, the barn door that hung crooked on its hinges, the roof that clearly needed repairs. "Seems like you could use some help," he observed. "Seems like you should mind your own business," Sarah shot back, though without real heat. She was exhausted from trying to maintain everything herself, and the judgment of the town women still stung fresh and raw. Isaac held up his hands in a gesture of peace. Did not mean offense, just an observation. He moved back toward his campfire, pouring coffee from a small pot into a tin cup. "You want some? It is strong, but it is hot." Sarah knew she should refuse, should send him on his way immediately. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the loneliness of the past 2 years, or the humiliation of the morning's gossip, or simply the fact that he had not looked at her with pity or judgment, just straightforward assessment. She climbed down from the wagon, keeping the rifle in one hand. "1 cup," she said. "Then you move along." He poured a second cup and held it out to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and Sarah felt a jolt of something unfamiliar run up her arm. She stepped back quickly, nearly spilling the coffee. Isaac noticed but said nothing, returning to his seat by the fire. "You run this place yourself?" "I manage," Sarah said, settling onto a log across from him. The coffee was indeed strong, bitter and black, but it warmed her from the inside. "My father left it to me. Good land, hard to work alone, though." "I'm aware of that," Sarah said dryly. She found herself studying him in the afternoon light. He was probably the most physically imposing man she had ever seen, all muscle and strength, but there was an unexpected gentleness in the way he moved, a carefulness as he tended his fire and checked his supplies. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" "Since I was 22. Came west after the war, could not stomach cities anymore, found peace up there." He gestured toward the peaks again. "It is quiet, honest, things make sense." Sarah understood that more than she wanted to admit. "You never wanted to settle down, start a family?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes distant. "Tried that once. Wife died of fever our first winter together. Lost the baby, too." The pain in his voice was old but still present, a wound that had scarred over but never fully healed. "After that, figured the mountains were all I needed. Animals don't die on you because you picked the wrong valley or built your cabin in the wrong spot." "I am sorry," Sarah said softly, and meant it. She knew loss, had watched her mother die when she was 15, then her father 2 years ago, leaving her alone with nothing but land and memories. "Was a long time ago." Isaac finished his coffee and stood, moving to check his horse's hooves again. Sarah watched the play of muscles across his back and shoulders, the easy confidence with which he handled the massive animal. "I should let you get back to your day. Thank you for the hospitality." Sarah found herself not wanting him to leave, which was absurd. She had just met this man, this stranger who lived like a wild creature in the mountains. But there was something about him that drew her, a quiet strength that did not demand or judge, just existed. "The barn door," she heard herself say. "If you know how to fix it, I have some spare hinges in the shed." "Would not take more than an hour." Isaac turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his weathered features. "You want my help?" "I'm offering fair trade. You fix the door, I will give you a hot meal before you head out. Assume you have been eating trail rations for weeks." Sarah stood, brushing off her skirt. She was not entirely sure what she was doing, but the thought of watching him leave and returning to her empty house felt suddenly unbearable. A slow smile spread across Isaac's face, transforming it from hard and distant to something warm and alive. "That's a fair trade, Miss Catherine," she blinked. How do you know my name? Saw it on your wagon, also heard talk in town last time I was down. People mentioned Thomas Catherine's daughter, said she was running the place alone now. He untethered his horse, leading it toward her barn. Did not realize that was you. Sarah wondered what else he had heard, what gossip had reached even the mountain men who came to town twice a year. She pushed the thought aside and led him to the shed where her father's tools still hung in neat rows. Isaac surveyed them with approval, selecting what he needed with the efficiency of someone who knew his way around carpentry. She left him to his work and returned to her house to start on the promised meal. Through the kitchen window, she could watch him as he removed the old hinges, his movements precise and economical. There was something mesmerizing about watching a man who knew exactly what he was doing, who did not fumble or hesitate. Her father had been capable, but always impatient, rushing through repairs with curses and frustration. Isaac worked with the calm patience of someone who had learned to do things right the first time, because there was no one to help if things went wrong. Sarah pulled out flour, eggs, salt pork, and the vegetables from her garden. She made biscuits and gravy, fried up the pork until it was crispy, and prepared green beans with bacon. It was more food than she usually bothered with for herself, and she realized with a start that she was trying to impress him, this mountain man she had just met. By the time the meal was ready, Isaac had finished with the barn door. She heard him working the mechanism, testing it to make sure it opened and closed smoothly. Then he appeared at her back door, having washed his hands and face at the pump, his hair wet and slicked back from his face. "Smells good," he said, hovering at the threshold as though uncertain whether he should enter. "Come in and eat while it's hot," Sarah said, trying to sound casual despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. She had not had a man in her house since her father died, and certainly never one like Isaac Jamison. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and his presence seemed to fill her small kitchen. Sarah gestured to the table, and he sat carefully, as though afraid his size might break the furniture. She served him a heaping plate, then fixed one for herself, sitting across from him. Isaac ate with the focused intensity of someone who did not take hot meals for granted. Sarah picked at her own food, watching him and trying not to be obvious about it. After several minutes, he looked up and caught her staring. She quickly looked down at her plate, heat rising to her cheeks. "This is the best meal I've had in months," Isaac said. "You are a fine cook, Miss Catherine." "Call me Sarah," she said, surprising herself again. She never invited familiarity, had spent years keeping people at arm's length because it was safer, easier, less painful than risking connection and loss. "Sarah," he repeated, and the way he said her name, slow and deliberate, sent a shiver down her spine. "Call me Isaac." They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Sarah realized this was the most comfortable she had felt in someone's presence in years. There was no pressure to make conversation, no judgment hanging in the air, just two people sharing a meal. "How long are you planning to stay in the area?" Sarah asked eventually, refilling his coffee cup. "Was planning to head back up tomorrow after getting supplies, but I'm flexible." Isaac met her eyes across the table. "Why do you ask?" Sarah hesitated, torn between practicality and the fear of what people would say. But then she remembered Mrs. Patterson's voice in the general store, the pitying gossip, and something defiant rose up in her. She was 30 years old, and she had spent her entire life living according to other people's rules and expectations. Maybe it was time to make her own choices. "There are other repairs that need doing," she said carefully. "The roof has leaks, several fence sections are down, and the chicken coop needs reinforcing before winter. If you wanted work for a few days, I could offer room and board. The room above the barn is clean and dry." Isaac studied her for a long moment, those amber eyes seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "People in town might talk, seeing a man staying on your property." "People in town already talk," Sarah said, more bitterly than she intended. "At least this way I would get my farm fixed." "What do they say?" Isaac asked quietly. Sarah looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "That I am odd, that I am 30 and have never been courted, never been with a man, that it is not natural." The words came out in a rush, and she immediately regretted her honesty. She waited for him to look at her with pity, or worse, with the kind of prurient curiosity that some men showed when they realized she was inexperienced. Instead, Isaac simply nodded. "Nothing wrong with being careful. World is full of men who do not deserve a woman's trust. Sounds like you were waiting for the right one, not just the first one who came along. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes searching his face for mockery or judgment. She found neither, just a simple acceptance that made something tight in her chest begin to loosen. That is, not how most people see it. Most people are fools, Isaac said bluntly. He pushed his empty plate away and leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. I will stay for a week, help you get things fixed up proper before the weather turns. Room and board is fair payment. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. What? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I am not a man used to civilization. I have been living alone in the mountains for years, coming to town only when I have to. I do not know how to be proper or polite or any of those things townfolk expect. All I know is being honest and doing right by people who treat me fair. His amber eyes held hers. You treat me fair, I will do the same. But I would not blame you for sending me on my way if you decided this is not a good idea. Sarah thought about the long, lonely months stretching ahead, the repairs she could not manage alone, the endless work that wore her down a little more each day. But more than that, she thought about the way he had looked at her, seeing her as a person rather than an oddity or a scandal. She thought about his quiet strength, his unexpected understanding, and the strange pull she felt toward him that was entirely new and terrifying. Stay, she said. A week. We will see how it goes. Isaac's slow smile returned, and Sarah felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. Then we have a deal. The rest of the evening passed in quiet conversation. Isaac told her about life in the mountains, about tracking elk and bear, about winter so harsh that a man could freeze to death in minutes if he was not careful. He spoke of the beauty up there, the silence so complete you could hear your own heartbeat, the stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Sarah listened, fascinated by this world she had never seen, so different from her struggling farm in the valley. In turn, she told him about Coloma, about the gold rush days when the town had been wild and chaotic, about her father's strictness and her mother's gentle nature. She spoke of the difficulty of running the farm alone, of the small triumphs and frequent defeats, of the isolation that had become both her protection and her prison. When the sky outside the windows turned purple with twilight, Isaac stood to leave. Thank you for the meal and the conversation, Sarah. I will get started on the roof in the morning, if that suits you. That would be fine, Sarah said, walking him to the door. She watched as he crossed the yard to the barn, his figure dark against the fading light, and felt a strange mixture of anticipation and fear about what she had set in motion. That night, lying in her bed alone as she had for 2 years, Sarah thought about Isaac Jamison sleeping in the room above her barn. She wondered if he was thinking about her too, and the thought made her pulse race in a way that was entirely unfamiliar. She had spent 30 years untouched, unkissed, unexperienced in all the ways that made the town women gossip. But for the first time, she found herself wondering what it would be like to be touched by a man like Isaac, to be held by those strong arms, to be seen and wanted and cherished. The thoughts both thrilled and terrified her, and she lay awake long into the night, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant sound of the river, her mind spinning with possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider before. Morning came with golden light streaming through her windows. Sarah rose early, as she always did, and dressed in her work clothes. She made breakfast, cooking extra without thinking about it, and was just pulling biscuits from the oven when she heard Isaac moving around in the barn. He appeared at her door a few minutes later, looking slightly sleep-rumpled, but alert. "Morning," he said. "Something smells good." They ate together again, and Sarah marveled at how quickly it was beginning to feel natural, having him there. After breakfast, Isaac climbed up onto her roof with supplies and tools, and Sarah went about her usual chores, feeding chickens and tending to her cattle. She tried not to watch him work, but found her eyes drawn to him repeatedly, mesmerized by the flex of muscle as he pulled up damaged shingles and hammered in new ones. Around mid-morning, she brought him water and found him sitting on the roof's peak, surveying the valley with an expression of contentment. "Beautiful view from up here," he said, accepting the water gratefully. "My father built this house himself when he first came to California," Sarah said, shading her eyes to look up at him. "He wanted to be able to see the mountains from every window." "Smart man," Isaac took a long drink, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. This is good land, Sarah. With the right work, you could have a fine operation here. If I do not collapse from exhaustion first, Sarah said wryly. Some days I think about selling, moving to Sacramento or San Francisco, finding work as a seamstress or a cook. You would hate the city, Isaac said with certainty. I can see it in you. You are like me. You need space and sky and growing things. Cities would suffocate you. Sarah was startled by his insight, by the way he seemed to understand things about her that she had barely acknowledged to herself. How can you tell? The way you look at the mountains, the way you talk about your land, even when you are complaining about the work. It is in your blood, same as it is in mine. He set down the water cup and picked up his hammer again. You just need help is all. Nobody can do everything alone. The words stayed with Sarah as she returned to her work. Nobody can do everything alone. She had been trying to for 2 years, determined to prove she could manage, that she did not need anyone. But the truth was, she was drowning, slowly but surely, and she had been too proud or too stubborn to admit it. Over the next few days, Isaac worked his way through the list of repairs. He fixed the roof, mended the fences, reinforced the chicken coop, and tackled a dozen smaller jobs that Sarah had been putting off. She cooked for him, and they fell into an easy routine, eating meals together and talking in the evenings after the work was done. Sarah learned that Isaac had fought for the Union during the war, that he had seen things that still haunted him sometimes, that the mountains had been his refuge and salvation. He told her about his wife, Margaret, who had been young and excited about their life together until fever had taken her, and about how he had buried her and their stillborn daughter in a grove of aspens high in the peaks. In turn, Sarah found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about her father's impossible standards, about the suitors he had driven away with threats and intimidation, about how she had watched other girls her age marry and start families while she remained trapped in her father's house. She spoke of her fear that she had waited too long, that she had missed her chance at love and family, that she would die alone on this farm with nothing to show for her life. You have not missed anything, Isaac said one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the stars come out. You just have not found the right person yet. There is a difference. How do you know when someone is the right person? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. She had never had anyone to ask these questions, her mother having died before explaining such things, her father believing such knowledge would only lead her astray. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I think you just know. It feels right, like coming home after a long journey. You can be yourself without pretending or hiding. You trust them with the parts of yourself that you keep locked away from everyone else. He glanced at her in the starlight. Does that make sense? Yes, Sarah whispered, because it did. It made perfect sense, and more than that, it described exactly how she was beginning to feel about Isaac. In less than a week, he had become the person she most looked forward to seeing, the one with whom she could be completely honest, the one who made her feel seen and valued in ways she never had before. The realization terrified her. She barely knew him. He was planning to leave in a few days, to return to his solitary life in the mountains. Whatever this was between them, it had an expiration date, and Sarah did not know if she could bear another loss. That night, she lay awake again, wrestling with her feelings. She was 30 years old, untouched and inexperienced, and she was falling for a mountain man who would disappear into the wilderness and probably never return. It was foolish, dangerous, the kind of thing that would lead only to heartbreak. But when she saw Isaac the next morning, smiling at her over breakfast, all her logical arguments crumbled to dust. On the 5th day of Isaac's stay, Sarah went into town for supplies. She'd been avoiding it, not wanting to face the gossip, but she was running low on flour and coffee. She left early, hoping to be back before noon. The moment she walked into the general store, she felt the eyes on her. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Holloway were there again, along with several other women, and their conversation died the instant Sarah appeared. "Sarah," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "how lovely to see you. We heard you have a visitor at your farm." Sarah's stomach dropped. Of course they had heard. Nothing stayed secret in a town this small. "I hired someone to do repairs," she said evenly, moving to gather her supplies. A mountain man, we heard, Mrs. Holloway chimed in. Living on your property. Sarah, dear, do you think that is wise? People will talk. People are already talking, Sarah said sharply, her patience finally snapping. They talked when I was alone, saying it was not natural for a woman to run a farm by herself. Now they talk because I hired someone to help. There is no winning with this town, is there? The women looked taken aback by her outburst. Mrs. Patterson recovered first, her expression hardening. We are only concerned for your reputation, dear. A woman alone with a man, especially a rough mountain man, it simply is not done. My reputation? Sarah set down the flour sack she was holding with more force than necessary. You mean the reputation you already destroyed by gossiping about my private life? By announcing to everyone in this store that I am 30 and untouched, as though that is anyone's business but mine? Mrs. Patterson had the grace to look embarrassed, though Mrs. Holloway bristled with indignation. We were merely stating facts, Mrs. Holloway said, and showing concern for your well-being. Your father would be appalled at your behavior. My father, Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger, spent his entire life making sure I never had a chance at happiness. He drove away every man who showed interest, convinced they were all unworthy. And now he is gone, and I am alone, and you all stand around judging me for trying to survive. Well, I am done caring what any of you think. She gathered her supplies quickly, paid Mr. Henderson, who had been wisely staying out of the conversation, and left the store with her head high despite the tears threatening to fall. The ride back to the farm felt endless. Sarah's hands shook on the reins, adrenaline and anger making her heart race. She had never spoken to anyone like that before, had always been the quiet, proper Catherine girl who kept her head down and her opinions to herself. But something had changed in her over the past few days, something Isaac had awakened with his quiet acceptance and straightforward manner. When she pulled into the yard, Isaac emerged from the barn, took one look at her face, and strode over to help her down from the wagon. His hands were gentle on her waist as he lifted her down, and the touch made her want to cry even more. What happened? He asked, his voice low and concerned. Sarah told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. Isaac listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she described the confrontation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I should go, he said finally. I am making things harder for you. No, Sarah said quickly, grabbing his arm without thinking. Please do not. I meant what I said to them. I am done living my life according to their rules and judgments. Isaac looked down at her hand on his arm, then up to meet her eyes. Sarah, you need to understand what you are risking. I'm not some respectable farmer or shopkeeper. I live in the mountains like an animal. I come to town twice a year. I have no money beyond what I make from my furs, and I have not been part of civilized society in nearly a decade. If you associate with me, those women will tear your reputation to shreds. My reputation is already in shreds, Sarah said, and I do not care. Isaac, these past few days, talking with you, being around you, I have felt more alive than I have in years, maybe ever. I cannot go back to being that lonely, miserable person I was before you showed up. Something intense flickered in Isaac's amber eyes. You do not know what you are saying. Yes, I do. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. For 30 years, I let my father's fears control my life. For 2 years after he died, I let loneliness and exhaustion wear me down. I am done with that. I know this is fast, I know it does not make sense, but Isaac, you make me want things I have never wanted before. You make me hope that maybe it is not too late for me to have a life, a real life, not just an existence. Isaac's hands came up to cup her face, his calloused palms rough against her skin. You need to be sure about this, Sarah, because if you ask me to stay, if you tell me you want this, I do not know if I will be able to walk away. Then do not walk away, Sarah whispered. Stay, not just for a week, stay. For a long moment, Isaac just looked at her, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. Then he bent his head and kissed her, and Sarah's entire world tilted on its axis. His lips were gentle at first, questioning, giving her the chance to pull away. But Sarah had no intention of pulling away. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with all the pent-up longing and need she had been suppressing for days. Isaac made a low sound in his throat and deepened the kiss, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her against his chest. Sarah had never been kissed before, had never been held like this, and it was overwhelming in the best possible way. She felt safe and desired and precious all at once, felt things awakening in her body that she had only read about in forbidden books. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she could not stop the smile that spread across her face. "I have wanted to do that since the first day," Isaac admitted, his voice rough. "Took everything in me not to." "Why did you wait?" Sarah asked, still pressed against him, reluctant to step away. "Wanted to make sure you wanted it too. Wanted to give you time to know your own mind." Isaac's hands moved to her hair, gently removing the pins that held it up, letting it fall around her shoulders. "You are so beautiful, Sarah. Do you know that? So strong and brave and beautiful." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever called her beautiful before. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Being brave means doing things even when you are terrified," Isaac said. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "You stood up to those women today. You told me to stay even though you do not know what will happen. That is courage, Sarah." They stood there in the yard, holding each other, until the horses stamped impatiently, reminding them that the wagon still needed to be unloaded. Isaac helped her carry the supplies into the house, and they moved around each other with a new awareness, every accidental touch electric and meaningful. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Sarah found herself humming, a habit she had lost somewhere in the difficult years. Isaac smiled when he heard it, and the warmth in his eyes made her feel giddy and reckless. "What happens now?" she asked, as they sat down to eat. "You were supposed to leave in 2 days." "I stay," Isaac said simply. "Help you get this farm running proper. Then, if you still want me around when winter comes, I will stay through that too. My trap lines will wait. They have waited this long." "You would give up your life in the mountains? For me?" Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. "I have been alone up there for a long time," Isaac said quietly. "It was what I needed after Margaret died, time to heal and find myself again. But maybe I've been hiding too, same as you were hiding down here. Maybe it is time for both of us to stop hiding and start living." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand, marveling at the size difference, at the way her fingers disappeared in his grip. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I do not know how to be with someone, how to share my life. My father never taught me any of that." "We will figure it out together," Isaac said, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm not exactly an expert on courting, Sarah. Been out of practice for a long time, but I am willing to learn if you are." "I am willing," Sarah said, and meant it with everything in her. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Isaac fell into a new rhythm. They worked the farm together, and Sarah was amazed at how much easier everything became with 2 pairs of hands. Isaac was patient with her cattle, gentle with her horses, and had a knack for fixing things that seemed beyond repair. He built a new gate for the chicken coop, repaired her plow, and even started clearing additional land for planting next season. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch or by the fireplace as the weather grew cooler, talking about everything and nothing. Isaac taught her about tracking animals, about reading weather signs in the clouds and the behavior of birds. Sarah shared her dreams of expanding the farm, maybe getting a few sheep, trying her hand at growing wheat. And slowly, carefully, they explored their growing feelings for each other. Isaac kissed her often, long, slow kisses that made Sarah's toes curl and her heart race. He held her hand as they walked the property line, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. He brought her wildflowers he found in the woods, and once, a perfectly shaped pine cone that he said reminded him of her because it was small but resilient. Sarah found herself touching him more freely as her shyness faded, running her fingers through his long hair, resting her hand on his arm as they talked, leaning into him when they sat together. She loved the feel of his muscles under her palms, the solid strength of him, the way he made her feel both protected and empowered at the same time. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Isaac pulled her into his lap. Sarah went willingly, curling against his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her ear. "Sarah," he said softly, his breath stirring her hair, "I need to tell you something." "What?" She tilted her head to look up at him, suddenly nervous at his serious tone. "I love you," Isaac said, his amber eyes holding hers. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I'm certain. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you will have me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not know it could feel like this, did not know I could feel this way about someone. But Isaac, I do. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Do not be scared," Isaac said, cupping her face in his large hands. "I will take care of you, Sarah. I will work this land with you, build a life with you, love you for as long as I draw breath. You will never be alone again, I promise you that." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and Sarah felt heat spread through her body. She shifted in his lap, her arms winding around his neck, and felt him tense beneath her. "Sarah," he groaned against her mouth, "we should stop." "Why?" She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, her own filled with a combination of love and desire she no longer wanted to hide. "Because you are untouched, and I'm trying to be respectful. We should wait until we are married. Do this right." But his hands on her waist tightened, belying his words. "I have waited 30 years, Sarah said. "I do not want to wait anymore. I want you, Isaac. I want to be yours in every way." Isaac searched her face, looking for any doubt or uncertainty. "Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there is no going back." "I am sure," Sarah said firmly. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." Isaac stood, lifting her easily in his arms, and carried her to her bedroom. He set her down gently on the bed, his eyes never leaving hers. "If you change your mind at any point, you tell me. Understand?" "I understand," Sarah said, reaching for him. What followed was tender and overwhelming, sometimes awkward, but always loving. Isaac was patient, guiding her through her nervousness, making sure she felt safe and cherished. He took his time, showing her what her body was capable of feeling, introducing her to pleasures she had only imagined. And when it was over, Sarah lay in his arms, feeling transformed, no longer untouched, but fully alive, completely his. "Are you all right?" Isaac asked, stroking her hair as she rested against his chest. "I am more than all right," Sarah said, smiling against his skin. "I am perfect." They lay together in the darkness, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of the dying fire in the other room. Sarah traced patterns on Isaac's chest, marveling at the intimacy of it, at how natural it felt to be with him like this. "We should get married," Isaac said eventually. "I want to do this right, Sarah. I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours." "Yes," Sarah agreed immediately. "But Isaac, the town people are not going to be happy about this. They already think I am scandalous." "Let them think what they want," Isaac said firmly. "Anyone who meets you and does not see how special you are is a fool. We will build our life here, together, and if people cannot accept that, it is their loss." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future. Isaac would officially move into the house, though he had essentially been living there for weeks already. They would get married as soon as possible, maybe bring a preacher out to the farm rather than dealing with the town's judgment. They talked about expanding the farm, about getting through the winter together, about the possibility of children someday. That last topic made Sarah both excited and nervous. She was 30 years old, not exactly young to be starting a family. But Isaac assured her that his mother had been 35 when she had him, and everything had been fine. They had time, he told her. Time to build their life together first, time to simply be a couple before adding children to the mix. As November arrived and the weather turned cold, Isaac proved his worth in countless ways. He had experience with harsh winters from his years in the mountains, and he made sure the house was properly weatherproofed, that they had enough firewood stacked to last months, that the animals had adequate shelter. He hunted, bringing back deer and wild turkey to supplement their supplies, and he taught Sarah how to preserve meat and prepare hides. The town gossip continued, of course. Sarah heard through Mr. Henderson, who delivered supplies to the farm now that she refused to go into town herself, that Mrs. Patterson and her friends were scandalized by the situation. An unmarried man and woman living together, they said. It was unseemly, improper, probably sinful. But Sarah found she genuinely did not care anymore. She was happier than she had ever been, working alongside Isaac, laughing at his stories, falling asleep in his arms every night. The opinions of narrow-minded townspeople seemed small and insignificant compared to the love she had found. In mid-November, they managed to get Reverend Walsh to come out to the farm. He was an older man who had known Sarah's parents, and while he was not entirely pleased with the unconventional situation, he agreed to perform the ceremony. They were married on a crisp, clear day, with the mountains as their witness and Mr. Henderson and his wife as their only guests. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, which she had carefully preserved all these years. Isaac wore new clothes, his first store-bought outfit in years, though he insisted on keeping his comfortable boots. When he saw Sarah walking toward him, his face transformed with such joy and love that she started crying before the ceremony even began. "You look beautiful," Isaac whispered as she took her place beside him. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Sarah teased back, though her voice was thick with emotion. Reverend Walsh kept the ceremony short and simple. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac pulled Sarah into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, making Mrs. Henderson giggle and the Reverend clear his throat in mild disapproval. They celebrated with a simple meal that Sarah and Mrs. Henderson had prepared together. The older woman had been surprisingly kind once she heard the full story, understanding perhaps that Sarah and Isaac had found something genuine and rare. As the sun set and their guests departed, Sarah and Isaac stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. "Mrs. Jamison," Isaac said, testing out the name, "how does it feel?" "Perfect," Sarah said, leaning into his warmth. "Everything feels perfect." Winter came in earnest in December, with snow blanketing the valley and ice forming on the river. But inside their home, Sarah and Isaac were warm and content. They spent the long evenings playing cards, reading aloud to each other from Sarah's small collection of books, and planning for spring. Isaac carved wooden figures by the firelight, his hands sure and skilled, creating a set of animals that he said would be for their children someday. Sarah learned to love the intimacy of winter, the way the weather forced them into close quarters, the necessity of sharing body heat under thick quilts, the quiet domesticity of cooking together and tending their animals side by side. She had thought she knew what happiness was, but being married to Isaac showed her depths of joy she had never imagined. In January, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, a missed monthly course, morning queasiness, a tenderness in her breasts. When she finally told Isaac, he picked her up and spun her around, his face radiant with happiness. "Are you sure?" he asked, setting her down gently as though she might break. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Sarah said, laughing at his sudden carefulness. "But yes, I'm fairly certain." Isaac placed his hand on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. "A baby. Our baby." Then his expression shifted to concern. "Are you all right? Do you feel well? Should you be working as hard as you have been?" "I am fine," Sarah assured him. "Women have babies all the time, Isaac. I am not fragile." But Isaac insisted on taking over the heavier chores, refusing to let Sarah lift anything too heavy or work herself to exhaustion. It was touching, if sometimes annoying, to see how protective he became. He read every book on pregnancy and childbirth that Mr. Henderson could find, asking Sarah constant questions about how she felt, what she needed, whether the baby was moving yet. As winter gave way to spring and Sarah's belly began to swell with their child, they made plans for the future. Isaac wanted to expand the house, add a proper nursery and perhaps another bedroom for future children. Sarah wanted to plant a larger garden, maybe get those sheep she had been dreaming about. They talked about their child, wondering if it would be a boy or a girl, what they would name it, what kind of person it would become. In late March, Sarah finally agreed to let Isaac take her into town to see Doc Morrison. She had been putting it off, not wanting to face the gossip, but Isaac insisted she needed to be checked by a doctor. They went early on a Tuesday morning when they hoped most of the busybodies would still be home. Doc Morrison was kind and professional, examining Sarah thoroughly and declaring both her and the baby healthy. "You're due sometime in late July or early August," he told them. "Everything looks good, Mrs. Jamison. Keep doing what you're doing." As they left the doctor's office, they ran into Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Holloway on the street. The women stopped short, their eyes going immediately to Sarah's visible pregnancy. Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to be ashamed, and Isaac's arm came around her waist in a gesture of protection and possession. "Sarah," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice dripping with false concern, "we heard you got married. How lovely." "It is lovely," Sarah said firmly. "Isaac is a wonderful husband, and we are very happy." Mrs. Holloway's eyes were on Sarah's stomach. "And I see congratulations are in order. How far along are you?" 6 months, Isaac said before Sarah could answer, his tone making it clear he would brook no implication of impropriety. "Baby is due in late summer." The women did some quick mental calculations, and Sarah could see them trying to determine whether she and Isaac had been intimate before marriage. Let them wonder, she thought. It was none of their business. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said, clearly struggling to find something cutting to say, "we hope everything goes well for you." "Thank you," Sarah said with more grace than she felt. She took Isaac's arm and walked past them, her head high. As they climbed into their wagon, Isaac leaned over and kissed her cheek. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You did not let them make you feel small." "I have you beside me," Sarah said simply. "That makes all the difference." The spring passed in a blur of activity. Isaac worked tirelessly to expand the house, building a beautiful nursery with a window facing the mountains. He crafted a cradle from pine, carving delicate designs into the wood, and Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. They acquired a small flock of sheep, just 5 ewes and a ram, and Isaac built them a proper shelter. The farm was beginning to thrive under their combined efforts, looking less like a struggling operation and more like a real homestead. Sarah's garden flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables, and their chickens laid more eggs than they could use themselves, allowing them to sell the extras in town. As Sarah's due date approached, Isaac became increasingly nervous. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest, bringing her water and snacks, checking on her multiple times throughout the day. Sarah found it endearing, even when it became excessive. "Isaac," she said one evening in mid-July, taking his face in her hands, "I am fine. The baby is fine. You need to relax." "I cannot help it," Isaac admitted. "I lost Margaret and our baby. I cannot lose you, Sarah. You are everything to me." Sarah's heart melted. She pulled him close, letting him rest his head against her swollen belly, feeling their baby kick against his cheek. "You are not going to lose me," she promised. "I am strong, and Doc Morrison said everything is perfect. This baby is going to be born healthy, and I am going to be fine, and then you are going to be a father, the best father any child could ask for." The baby came on a hot August night, arriving after a long labor that left Sarah exhausted but triumphant. Isaac stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. When their son finally made his appearance, letting out a lusty cry that filled the bedroom, Isaac's eyes filled with tears. "A boy," Doc Morrison announced, handing the baby to Sarah. "Congratulations, both of you. He is perfect." Sarah cradled her son against her chest, overwhelmed by the tiny, perfect life she and Isaac had created. The baby had a shock of dark hair like his father, and when he finally opened his eyes, they were the same striking amber color. "Hello, little one," Sarah whispered, running her finger along his tiny cheek. "Welcome to the world." Isaac knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of absolute awe. "He is so small," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "So perfect." "Do you want to hold him?" Sarah asked. Isaac nodded, and Sarah carefully transferred the baby into his father's large, capable hands. The contrast was striking, this huge mountain man cradling such a tiny infant with infinite gentleness. Isaac looked down at his son, and tears rolled down his face unchecked. "Thank you," he said to Sarah, his voice breaking. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a family again. I never thought I would get another chance at this, and you gave it to me." "We gave it to each other," Sarah said, reaching up to wipe his tears. She was crying too, overwhelmed by love and exhaustion and joy. They named him Thomas Isaac, after Sarah's father and his own father, but they called him Tommy. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's build and his mother's determination. Sarah recovered quickly from the birth, and within weeks was back to managing the household, though Isaac insisted on doing most of the heavy work. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Tommy was fascinated by everything, his eyes following his parents as they moved around, his small fists waving enthusiastically whenever Isaac picked him up. Isaac was besotted with his son, spending hours just holding him, talking to him, singing old songs he remembered from his own childhood. Sarah had never seen her husband so happy. The shadows that sometimes lingered in his eyes, remnants of the loss he had suffered years ago, seemed to finally fade completely. He had a family again, a real family, and the joy it brought him was palpable. As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, the farm continued to prosper. Isaac's hunting skills kept them well supplied with meat, and Sarah's careful management meant they always had vegetables, eggs, and dairy. They expanded their sheep flock, and Isaac proved to have a knack for animal husbandry, producing healthy lambs each spring that they could sell for good prices. The town gradually came to accept their relationship, partly because it was clear how happy and successful they were, and partly because Sarah and Isaac simply did not care what anyone thought. They attended church occasionally, more for Tommy's sake than their own, and they were polite but distant with most of the townspeople. Their life was on their farm, with each other, and that was enough. When Tommy was 2 years old, Sarah became pregnant again. This time, Isaac was calmer, having been through it once before, though he was still protective and attentive. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Ann after Isaac's first wife and Sarah's mother, was born on a crisp October morning, coming into the world with the same healthy cry her brother had. Margaret would be glad, Isaac said softly as he held his daughter for the first time. Glad that we used her name, glad that I found happiness again. She was like that, always wanting the best for everyone. Tell me about her, Sarah said. She had heard stories over the years, but she wanted to know more, wanted to honor the woman who had been Isaac's first love. Isaac told her about Margaret's laugh, her kindness, her excitement about their life together. He spoke of his grief when he lost her, but also of his gratitude that he had known her at all, even briefly. And he told Sarah how much he loved her, how she had healed wounds he thought would never close, how she had given him a second chance at the family he had always wanted. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Tommy grew into a sturdy boy with his father's size and his mother's stubbornness, helping on the farm as soon as he was old enough. Maggie, as they called their daughter, was quieter than her brother, with a thoughtful nature and a love of animals that reminded Isaac of himself at that age. Sarah and Isaac added 2 more children to their family over the years, another son they named James and a daughter called Rose. Their house was full of noise and laughter, of children running through the rooms and playing in the yard, of family dinners around a crowded table. The farm thrived, becoming one of the most successful operations in the valley, and Isaac's reputation changed from that of a wild mountain man to a respected farmer and family man. But despite all the changes and growth, some things remained constant. Every evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah and Isaac would sit together on their porch, watching the sunset behind the mountains. Isaac would pull Sarah close, and they would talk about their day, their children, their plans for the future. And Sarah would marvel, as she did every day, at how different her life was from what she had expected. She had been 30 years old, untouched and alone, when Isaac Jamison had ridden onto her property. The town had thought she was an oddity, a woman who had missed her chance. But Isaac had seen the truth that day when he heard the gossip, and he had told anyone who would listen. She had not missed anything. She had simply been waiting for the right man. And she had found him. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Isaac took a rare day away from the farm, leaving the older children in charge and riding up into the mountains together. Isaac led her to a spot high in the peaks, a meadow filled with wildflowers and surrounded by aspens. It was beautiful and peaceful, the kind of place that felt separate from the rest of the world. "This is where I buried Margaret and our baby," Isaac said, dismounting and helping Sarah down from her horse. "I come here sometimes to remember, to say thank you for the time we had." Sarah understood. She had her own places where she remembered her parents, her own private moments of gratitude for what they had given her. She took Isaac's hand and they stood together in the meadow, the breeze rustling the aspen leaves above them. "I brought you here because I wanted you to see this place," Isaac continued. "Wanted you to know that you are not a replacement for Margaret or a second choice. You are the love I was meant to find, Sarah. Losing Margaret nearly destroyed me, but it also led me on a path that brought me to you. And I would not change that, would not wish away the journey, because it gave me you and our children and this life we have built together. Sarah turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. I love you, she said simply, more than I can ever express. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have, Isaac. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. Isaac pulled her into his arms, holding her close. We saved each other, he said against her hair. You were drowning on that farm alone, and I was hiding in these mountains. We both needed someone to pull us back to life, and we found each other just in time. They stood there for a long while, two people who had found unexpected love in the wilderness, who had built something lasting from loneliness and loss. Around them, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to their love story, guardians of the life they had created together. As they rode back down the mountain toward home, toward their children and their farm and their life, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the girl she had been, trapped by her father's fears and the town's judgment. She thought about the woman she had become, alone and struggling but refusing to give up. And she thought about the moment Isaac Jamison had ridden into her life, changing everything. The town women had been shocked to learn she was untouched at 30, had gossiped and judged and pitied her. But Isaac had understood what they could not. She had not been missing out on life. She had been patient, careful, waiting without even knowing she was waiting. She had been waiting for the right man. And when he came, weathered and strong and carrying his own scars, she had recognized him immediately, not with her mind, which had argued and worried and tried to find all the reasons it could not work, but with her heart, which had known from that first day that Isaac Jamison was the one she had been waiting for all along. As their farm came into view, with smoke rising from the chimney and children's voices carrying on the wind, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned or expected. It had turned out better. She glanced at Isaac riding beside her, his profile strong against the afternoon sky, and felt her heart swell with love. He caught her looking and smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her pulse race even after 10 years of marriage. What are you thinking? He asked. That I am the luckiest woman alive, Sarah said honestly. That I would not change a single thing about how we found each other. Not even the gossiping town women, Isaac teased. Not even them, Sarah laughed. If they had not been talking about me that day, you might never have learned about the Catherine girl living alone on her farm. Everything happened exactly as it was meant to. They rode into their yard to be greeted by their children, who ran out to meet them, excited to show their parents everything they had accomplished during the day. Tommy had fixed a broken fence rail, all by himself. Maggie had found a nest of baby rabbits and carefully moved it to safety away from the barn cats. James and Rose had picked berries and made a pie, which was slightly lopsided but smelled delicious. Isaac lifted Rose onto his shoulders while Sarah hugged James, both of them listening to their children's excited chatter. This was their life now, full of noise and chaos and love, so different from the silent loneliness that had defined both their lives before they found each other. That evening, after dinner and baths and bedtime stories, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah and Isaac sat together in their bedroom. Isaac brushed out Sarah's hair, a nightly ritual they had maintained since their wedding night, his touch gentle and reverent. "Do you ever miss the mountains?" Sarah asked. "Your old life before you met me?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "The silence, the freedom. But Sarah, I do not miss being alone. I thought I wanted solitude. Thought that was what I needed to heal from losing Margaret. But what I really needed was someone to share my life with. The mountains are still there when I need them, but now I have a reason to come home. I have you and our children, and that is worth more than all the silence in the world." Sarah turned to face him, taking the brush from his hands and setting it aside. She cupped his face, feeling the familiar roughness of his beard, seeing the love in his amber eyes that never failed to make her feel cherished and desired. "I was so lost when you found me," she said softly. "I did not even realize how lost I was. I thought I was managing, thought I was fine being alone. But I was just surviving, Isaac. You taught me how to live." "We taught each other," Isaac corrected, pulling her into his arms. You gave me back my humanity, Sarah. Living alone in the wild, I was becoming more animal than man. You reminded me what it meant to be part of something bigger than myself, to care about someone more than my own survival. They made love that night with the tenderness and passion that had only grown stronger over the years, two people who knew each other completely and loved each other deeply. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the darkness, Sarah thought about how far they had both come. She was 40 years old now, mother of 4, wife to the man she loved more than life itself. The girl who had been untouched at 30, who the town women had pitied and judged, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, who had found love and purpose and joy. The farm continued to thrive over the following years. Tommy grew into a young man who loved the land as much as his parents did, who worked alongside his father and learned everything Isaac could teach him about animals and crops and survival. Maggie developed a talent for healing, learning everything Doc Morrison could teach her and becoming invaluable during lambing season and when any of the animals fell ill. James showed an aptitude for business, keeping careful records of their sales and expenses, finding ways to maximize their profits. And Rose, the baby of the family, had her father's way with wild things, able to gentle the most skittish horse or coax the shyest animal out of hiding. Sarah and Isaac watched their children grow with pride and amazement, grateful for every day they had together as a family. They weathered storms and droughts, good years and lean years, but they weathered them together, their love and partnership never wavering. On Sarah's 50th birthday, the children threw her a party, inviting people from town and neighboring farms. To Sarah's surprise, Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Holloway were among the guests, both women now elderly and softened by time. Mrs. Patterson approached Sarah hesitantly, her hands twisting together. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology for the things I said years ago, the way I judged you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Sarah looked at the old woman and felt her anger from all those years ago fade into nothing. "Thank you," she said simply. "I appreciate you saying that." "You were right to wait," Mrs. Holloway added, coming to stand beside Mrs. Patterson. "You found the right man, and look at what you built together. We were just jealous, I think, because most of us settled for whoever would have us, but you held out for something real." Sarah glanced across the yard to where Isaac was entertaining a group of children, telling them some wild story that had them laughing and wide-eyed. He looked up and caught her eye, winking at her, and her heart fluttered just as it had 20 years ago. "I was very lucky," Sarah said, "but it was not just luck. It was being patient, being willing to wait even when it seemed impossible, and recognizing the right person when he finally came along." The party continued into the evening, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Sarah found herself pulled into a dance by Isaac, who swept her around their yard with surprising grace for such a large man. "Happy birthday, wife," he murmured in her ear. "Happy life, husband," Sarah replied, and they both laughed at the old joke. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Sarah looked around at everything they had built. Their home, their farm, their children who were growing into remarkable adults, their friends and neighbors who had finally come to accept and respect them. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. She thought about the woman she had been at 30, alone and ashamed, believing she had somehow failed at life. She wished she could go back and tell that woman not to worry, that everything was going to work out better than she could imagine, that the right man was coming, and he would see her for who she truly was, and together they would build something beautiful. But maybe that woman had known on some level. Maybe that was why she had never settled, never accepted the wrong suitors her father drove away, never gave up on the possibility of something real. Maybe she had been waiting all along, patient and hopeful, for Isaac Jamison to ride into her life on a black horse and change everything. Years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and new adventures. Tommy married a girl from town and built a house on the far corner of the property, raising his own family while helping manage the farm. Maggie went to nursing school in Sacramento but returned home, setting up a small practice where she cared for both people and animals. James opened a store in Coloma, selling their farm products and becoming a respected businessman. And Rose married a young man who worked for the Forestry Service, living part of the year in the mountains and part on the farm, the perfect compromise between wild and domestic. Sarah and Isaac became grandparents 7 times over, their house always full of visiting children and grandchildren. Isaac taught the young ones to track and hunt, to read the forest and respect the mountains. Sarah taught them to plant and harvest, to cook and preserve, to build a life with their own hands. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Isaac took another trip up to the mountain meadow where Margaret was buried. They were older now, Isaac's hair more gray than dark, Sarah's face lined with years of sun and laughter. But their hands fit together just as perfectly as they had 3 decades ago, and their love had only deepened with time. "Thank you," Isaac said to the meadow, to Margaret's memory. "Thank you for understanding, for not holding me to grief forever. I hope you know I kept my promise. I lived fully, I loved deeply, I made the most of my second chance." Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding that he needed this moment, this acknowledgement of the past, even as they lived fully in the present. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the wind in the aspens, feeling the peace of the high country. "Do you think they know?" Sarah asked eventually. "You're Margaret and my parents? Do you think they can see what we built?" "I think they know," Isaac said. "I think they are glad we found each other, that neither of us had to spend our lives alone." As they rode back down the mountain for what would be one of their last times, both of them feeling their age in their joints and muscles, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey of her life. She had started out as the odd Catherine girl, too sheltered and too different, the woman no one wanted. She had transformed into someone strong and capable, running a farm alone but drowning in loneliness. And then Isaac had appeared, and she had become someone she never knew she could be. Loved, cherished, the matriarch of a thriving family and a successful farm. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. How Grandma Sarah had been alone on her farm when Grandpa Isaac rode in tracking a bear. How the town women had gossiped about her being untouched at 30, and how Grandpa Isaac had said she was not missing out on anything, she was just waiting for the right man. How he had been that right man, and how they had built their entire life together from that chance meeting. The grandchildren loved the story, the romance of it, the idea that patience and faith could lead to such happiness. Sarah loved telling it, loved seeing their eyes light up, loved watching Isaac squirm with embarrassment when she got to the part about how handsome she had found him, even when he was a stranger camping in her yard. As Sarah approached 70, her health began to decline. It was nothing sudden or dramatic, just the slow winding down of a body that had worked hard for many years. Isaac tended her with the same devotion he had shown their entire marriage, sitting by her bedside, holding her hand, telling her stories to make her laugh. Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling the house with life and noise. Sarah loved watching them from her bed, seeing the continuation of everything she and Isaac had built. Tommy had his father's size and steady nature. Maggie had her mother's determination and healing touch. James had combined both parents' work ethic into something uniquely his own. And Rose, wild and free and deeply loved, was the perfect blend of mountain man and farm woman. On a warm summer evening, with Isaac sitting beside her and holding her hand as he had for 40 years, Sarah closed her eyes for the last time. She went peacefully, surrounded by love, her life complete and full. Isaac grieved deeply, but without the bitter edge of his first loss. He had had 40 beautiful years with Sarah, had watched their children grow and thrive, had built a legacy that would continue long after they were both gone. He took comfort in that, in the life they had created together. He lived 5 more years, staying on the farm with Tommy's family, teaching his grandchildren and great-grandchildren everything he knew about the land and the mountains. He told them stories about their grandmother, about how brave and beautiful and strong she had been, about how she had saved him as much as he had saved her. When Isaac died peacefully in his sleep at age 78, he was buried next to Sarah on a hill overlooking their farm, where they could see the mountains in one direction and their thriving land in the other. Their children planted wildflowers around the graves, the same kind that grew in the mountain meadow where Margaret rested. The farm continued, passed down through generations of their family. The story of Sarah and Isaac became part of the land itself, told around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder that love can come at unexpected times and in unexpected ways. That being untouched at 30 was not a shame or a failure, but sometimes a sign of wisdom and patience. That the right person is worth waiting for, even when it seems like they will never come. And high in the mountains, in a meadow filled with wildflowers, the aspens whispered their story to the wind, of a mountain man and a farm woman who found each other when both had given up hope, who built a beautiful life from loneliness and loss, who proved that sometimes the best things in life come to those who wait for the right moment, the right person, the right love. Their great-grandchildren still work the land, still tell the story, still believe in the power of patience and the possibility of finding true love. Because Sarah and Isaac Jamison showed them it was possible, showed them that real love is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. And on quiet evenings when the sun sets behind the mountains and the wind carries the scent of pine and wildflowers, some say you can feel their presence still, watching over the family they created, the land they loved, the legacy they left behind. Two souls who were meant to find each other, who waited through loneliness and loss until the perfect moment when a mountain man rode onto a struggling farm and changed two lives forever. She had been untouched at 30, and the town had been shocked. But the mountain man had known the truth. She had simply been waiting for the right man. And when he came, everything fell into place, creating a love story that would be remembered for generations to come.